Hey everyone, Ryan Mentz here, and today's video I'm going to be checking out the Sony a7R III for bird photography. I've been shooting with this for the past week and a half, and if you follow me on Instagram or see my videos before, you probably know that I use the a7R IV, and so I thought it'd be interesting to step back and use the previous model. And a lot of times you see with comparison videos, they have that older model and then they just bought that expensive, shiny, new model, and they kind of got to justify that cost of what they just bought, so they really love it. And I thought it'd be interesting, since I have the new model, I'll step back to the old one and see if I notice any differences in terms of the autofocus or the image quality or the handling, and report what I see there. All right, so let's get started. I have my notes written down here. So first up is going to be the pros, and these are the things that I think the a7R III is actually doing better than the R4. So hopefully you'd expect this list to be pretty short. You want that newer model obviously to be better than the older one, but I do have a few things to mention here for the pros of the R3. And first one is, the first one I wrote is on day one. As soon as I switched over, I noted that it feels more responsive. So going from the R4 back to the R3, I thought the R3 actually felt a little bit snappier. That's just kind of an overall feeling I had. So could be like the autofocus was snapping on faster. It would move the focus point around. It feels snappier. It has less prominent buttons, but also the side effect of having more prominent buttons with the R4 is that they kind of feel squishier and slower. So everything about it kind of feels snappier in that regard, more responsive. It feels lighter. And I should mention here that for this video, and this whole time I was testing and stuff, I never looked at the spec sheets because I didn't want that in my head at all. So I'm pretty sure it's actually lighter, but these are all going to be what I thought and not like what the spec sheets say. So if they're the exact same weight and stuff, that's just, I guess, a placebo effect or something, because it's the, I don't know, it's smaller? I don't know, but it feels lighter for sure. And the multi-selector feels more precise, it's more springy. Unlike the R4, it's not flat and mushy. So on the back of the camera, the multi-selector for change around the focus point, I thought that it's more joystick-like, I guess, where the R4, it's just like this flat thing, and it's kind of mushy when you're moving it around, whereas this one, when you're triggering it, it kind of snaps back into place and clicks, and it just feels overall better. The last thing I wrote on here, the R3 seems to be more accurate with birds in flight, and that's pretty true, but it could be a side effect of the R4 is just super finicky. So you could be sitting there and shooting a still subject, and like a quarter of your frames will for some reason be out of focus, but it's not like the plane of focus is off. It's just like blurry for no reason. So the R3 like doesn't suffer from that side effect as far as I can tell. So when you're shooting the motion and stuff, you're gonna come away with sharper photos more of the time. So those are the pros that I wrote down. The cons I split into two lists because it's not really entirely fair to say it's just a straight up con when it's the previous model. Like, advancements occur, that's what happens. But so I have cons major and cons minor. The major cons I wrote down: the shutter is louder with the R3, but the side effect of that is it makes the continuous shooting seem like it's faster. So the first thing I did notice, I think I wrote this down right away too, was that when you're shooting it, it's definitely louder. If you have more sensitive birds, it's going to affect them more. And so shutter noise does play a role, for me at least, in bird photography. So this one's louder. That's unfortunate. And then my second and final major con is going to be that the viewfinder resolution, it's really bad with the R3, as I guess I should say most mirrorless cameras are. So the R4 is kind of different because it has the highest available electronic viewfinder for mirrorless cameras these days, and everything else kind of lacks. It's not even like the R4 is still a little bit digital looking, so that's always just a drawback. So the thing you have to know when you're trying to discern focus, you're not looking in the viewfinder for what's sharp. You're looking for the least blurry thing. So even the sharpest point in your photos is going to look a little bit blurry with the digital viewfinder. It's just how it is. On the R4, I do think the sharp objects do actually look relatively sharp. All right, moving on to the minor cons I have with this camera is that the build feels cheap in comparison to the R4, and everything just kind of feels like more plasticky. And I kind of mentioned it before, how the R4, all the buttons are more prominent and they're more squishy and stuff and more rubbery feeling. That's kind of, it kind of makes it feel better. Whereas this one, it does feel kind of like toy camera-ish. Next is going to be that you can't limit the focus area. And so by that, I mean like the internal software on the R3 is a little bit different than the R4. So on the R3, you can not limit the like zone and center and the center surround points and the tracking, all that stuff. You can't like disable any of them. Whereas in the R4, I have it so like pretty much everything's disabled except for the 3 that I'll use. And then likewise, when I'm talking about the internal stuff, so there's no separate function quick menu for the photo and video side of things. So on the R4, you can have a function menu set up specifically when you're in a video mode. And then when you switch over to a photo mode, all those function options can be changed up so they're completely different. You can also set it up so it's the same, either one, but it's super helpful when you're switching between photo and video stuff. So if you're like photographing birds and then you got your shot and whatever, you just want some video now, you can switch over and you got all these different options that you can quickly set up for video. And then my last con, minor con for the R3 is going to be that just kind of obvious based on the specs of these things. So it's got less cropping power. But obviously, you know, this is one of those things that I should have looked at a spec sheet maybe, but I think this is 42 megapixels. I kind of forget now, but 42 is still like way more than a lot of other cameras are giving you for bird photography. It's the R4 is 61 megapixels, so it just gives you that extra bit of reach. I guess reach isn't the right word. Extra bit of cropping that you can do. So those are the pros and cons, but I also made another list that's the things that I thought might bother me, but they ended up not mattering too much, or things that are just kind of no change, how I feel about them. So first up is the size. I definitely thought that the bigger grip of the R4 was you know, going to be way better than having to deal with a smaller grip of the R3. But in the end, like when you're out there shooting, you don't think about these things. And I mean, unless it's like actually actively bugging you, like this kind of stuff does in the winter. But now that I'm not using thick gloves too much, it's just kind of, it's all the same. Next is that there's no exposure compensation lock on the R3, whereas they added one on the R4. And this is the thing that I already knew straight up that wasn't going to bother me, because it never bothered me on the older models that there was no lock. What does bother me, by the way, I'll add in, is this stupid lock. I hate this lock so much because it requires like, just like a weird way to like just switch your mode. I just want to switch my mode super easy. Is that too much to ask? Next is the autofocus speed and accuracy. And this might be like one of the more surprising ones, or maybe not surprising, but good to know ones if you're looking at the R3 or deciding between the two. So for my testing, I can't see a difference between the speed and accuracy. They feel definitely the same. The image quality, that's another one. Image quality, colors, dynamic range, those, I see no difference. There's no real-time tracking modes in the R3, whereas the R4 has all those new fancy tracking modes. I don't use any of the tracking modes, so I knew going in that this is going to be one of the things that's not going to bother me personally. For birds, it's kind of one of those things where it's just too slow, I think. So you kind of have to get like an accurate lock right away. And if you don't get that accurate lock, then you're kind of screwed out of getting your photo, because it's going to lock onto something else. Your bird's going to be traveling around, and you're just going to not be able to reacquire that lock or try again and miss. But that's kind of why I don't use tracking modes. Next is going to be that there's no dual UHS 2 slots, and only in memory 1, the memory card slot 1 is UHS 2. And this is, again, one of those things I went in, I knew wasn't going to bother me, because I barely ever touch the second card slot when I'm shooting. I don't duplicate the photos in camera, and I don't normally switch over to the second one ever, because I'm just not out there shooting, you know, a billion photos to have to switch over very often. I've done it like 3 times in the times I had Sony. And then this one didn't affect me, but it's just kind of one of those things that you have to know, is that the R3 on the bottom, especially, the weather sealing is much worse. So they kind of fixed things up with the R4 and made it, well, a little bit more beefy with the gaskets and stuff. So R4 is definitely going to be better weather sealed than the R3. All right, so that's what I found with my little experiment of going back to the R3. I'd say that if you're not overly concerned about the shutter loudness or the viewfinder resolution or the difference in megapixels, or you're not willing to spend the difference of $1,000 for them, the R3 is still just a very fantastic camera for bird photography, I think. So you really shouldn't have much hesitation if you're trying to decide between the two. If you need to save up another $1,000 for the R4, generally I'd probably say you don't, unless you're really looking forward to those specific features that the R4 has. It's a great camera still, obviously, but yeah, the R3 is going to get you most of the way there. It's not a $1,000 better camera, the R4. There's a difference there, but it's not a $1,000 difference in my opinion. So R3, still a terrific camera. And if you like this video, I hope you hit the thumbs up. I hope you subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time.